Hello everyone. We'll get started right away. Let me just turn off the music here. Let me just adjust my one sec. Just my my green screen is a bit stuck. Give me one sec here. Okay, think that should do it. There we go. All right. Everything works fine. So welcome everyone to this today's session. And today we will be talking about basically, whether you should be buying a pre-construction, and especially should you really be buying a pre-construction in 2020, given all the things that are currently going on, right? They do say that, best time to invest is when there's blood on the street. In other words, to be a contrarian usually pays out, or pays off, I should say. So should you really be investing right now in a pre-construction? Well, we'll look at the pros and cons, and that way you can make an informed decision. Depending on your circumstances, it might be a good idea in some cases. In other cases, it might be an amazing idea. In other cases, it probably would be the most the worst thing that you can possibly do. So we will look at the different situations, and that way you can figure out in which category you fall, and because it's not all about what should you be buying right now, but what should you be buying right now given your own short, long, medium-term goals and where you are currently in life. All right, so first of all, let's look at the pros and cons of buying a pre-construction versus just buying an existing home. Because obviously the assumption is if you want to buy a pre-construction, you probably have enough money to also buy a regular house as well. So when would one make more sense versus the other? Well, let's look at, first of all, let's start with the positives, both for existing homes and for pre-constructions. So the pros of existing homes are, well, you pretty much know exactly what you're going to get, right? When you're buying it, because you can actually see the home. Always get an inspection done, obviously by a professional, by a licensed inspector. That way, if anything is wrong with the foundation, if anything is wrong with with the roof or anything at all, you can address it right away. But at the end of the day, you can actually see it. You see the color of the bedroom. You can see the quality of the laminate that is being used. Is it real wood? Is it floating floors? Are they using granite countertops, etc., etc., etc. The reason I'm pointing this out is because with a pre-construction, the vast majority of pre-constructions, the most you get to see is, well, you get to see one or two template houses or template condos, which show you some of the features or some of the options that you can go ahead and customize, but you don't really know what you're gonna get until it's actually being built. In the vast majority of cases, the builders will respect their agreed upon materials and everything else, but there have been instances where in certain cases they might try to cut corners, or the project might go over budget. There might be certain issues that arise, and we'll see about that in a little bit. So existing home, you can see exactly what you're getting. Again, hire a professional to investigate and to inspect the property to make sure there's no hidden vices. But at the end of the day, with an existing home, you're more certain what you can get. If you're buying it in the secondary market, that's a fancy way of saying if it's already a home that was already purchased by somebody else, so you're not buying it brand new, you're the second or nth owner. At that point in time, you typically do not have to pay any form of harmonized sales tax or provincial sales taxes or other sales taxes, depending on the province you're in. Whereas if you're buying a brand new home, even if it's an existing one, you will typically have to pay the HST, unless the builder has a special deal and they say, you know what, we're covering the taxes, you just paid this particular price. What they don't really tell you is that that particular price is basically the price and the tax and roughly what the taxes are for them to still make a profit, obviously. But again, they might have certain features like this. So if you're buying it as the second or third or subsequent owners, you don't typically have to pay the HST, whereas with a pre-construction, you always have to pay the HST because you're always pretty much the first owner, right? That's the whole point of buying it before it's built. It's very hard for somebody else to be the owner before you built it, all right? So there's also typically or potentially a lower deposit that is needed for an existing home. And the reason I'm saying potentially, not guaranteed to be lower, because again, those of you that have attended some of my previous sessions when I was talking about mortgages and how those work, or some of my classes, for instance, you probably remember, and if you weren't here, well, here I'll tell you right now. So in Canada, if you're buying a house that is $500,000 or less, you can buy it with as little as 5% down. That's all you need, 5% down. So if you're buying an existing home, whether you're buying it brand new, right, or whether you're buying it as the nth owner, as long as the price is under $500,000, all you really need is 5% as a down payment, and that's it. If the house is basically between 500,000 and basically, $999.99, at that point, or let's just put it $1 million here, right? So up to $1 million minus 1 cent. In this case, for this value of the home, you need 10%, okay? But you don't need 10% on the full amount. So how does this actually work out? Well, this works out as this. So let's say you're buying a $750,000 home, right? On the first 500,000 of the 750, you only need 5% down. 5% of 500,000 is $25,000, right? And then on the next 250, so 750 minus 500,000, that gives you 250,000. On that, you need 10%. 10% of 250,000 is $25,000. So you need another 25,000 here for a grand total of 50K. Okay, so if you're buying a home that is between 500 and 1 million, then you need you need 10% down payment for that portion, and you need 5% down payment for the former portion. Okay, so this is how it works. Now, if you're buying a home that is above $1 million, and here when I say home, I mean condo or house. In both cases, in all these cases, that it is your principal residence, right? So basically, the home, the house or the condo that you will be using as your principal home that you're going to be living in. If it's an investment property, if it's a commercial property, if it's a summer home, a cottage, a boat house, or whatever it is, in those cases, you always need 20% down, regardless of price. Okay, and whenever it's $1 million plus, at that point you always need 20%. And in this case, this 20% is literally 20%. On the full amount. You're no longer doing this tiered amount. So in other words, if you're buying a house of $1,001, okay, so at this point you're above $1 million, right? You're at $1,001,000, okay. At this point, the minimum down payment would be 20% of the entire sum. Okay, so it would be basically it would be 200,020 cents, right? Because you're literally looking at this $1 here. That's 20% of it. So you need literally on the full amount. Whereas if your house you bought it only for $999, okay. At that point, you still use this tiered amount. So for this one, all you would need is 10% of $499,999.99. Okay, so obviously that would give you $49,999.99, right? Plus the initial 25,000, right? So all of this combined will be $74,999.99. Okay, So this is why a lot of times you will see houses that are around $1 million being priced right under $1 million, because if you manage to sell it for right under $1 million, then the down payment is only just around $75,000, whereas as soon as you cross over the 1 million mark, that brings you to $200,000. Okay? So again, this is for regular already existing homes if they're your principal residence. Now, why am I bringing all of this up now that we're talking about pre-constructions? Well, again, for existing homes, this is the math that applies. For pre-construction, even if it's supposed to be your principal residence, again, this varies a little bit from province to the next, but typically the minimum down payment, once you close, not when you initially sign the contract, but once upon closure, you typically you typically have to have a down payment of 15 to 20% minimum. Okay, so again, it varies a bit from one province to the next, but so this is why I'm saying that here in this case, if you're buying a home in a lower, either condo or a house that is already that is an existing construction, you can get away with a lower amount. And the reason for this is, again, this should kind of highlight the fact that this is considered slightly higher risk, because again, banks, they know they sort of are very familiar with the fact that buying a pre-construction at a predetermined price or initially determined price is higher risk than buying something that you can literally look at and see what it is, what is the quality, and investigate it right now. So because of that, it represents higher risk. Therefore, the banks really want you to kind of have more skin in the game, as it were. Okay, so. And one final pro of existing homes before we move on to the pros for pre-constructions is that it's typically easier to plan a move-in date with an existing home. The house is typically there, and again, with COVID-19, obviously the issue is it's a bit harder to kick someone out these days. It's pretty much impossible, honestly. Right now, in a few months, we'll see with the entire, mortgage deferral and rental deferral cliff coming to an end, maybe by late fall or early winter, we will see how that will pan out. But the whole point of it is that right now you literally cannot kick someone out. So if that individual is not able to sell the home, or maybe they're not able to move on and move to a different rental property, and let's say you just bought a house that currently somebody else lives in, right? You literally cannot, the current landlord or you as the current owner, you cannot kick a tenant out. So it's still not guaranteed that your move-in date will come to fruition, even if the house exists. But normally, under normal circumstances, it's usually a lot easier to estimate roughly when the house will be available when it's already an existing home. So what are some of the pros of a pre-construction? All right. Well, there's a significantly larger potential for customization. Whether you're building something, obviously, if you want to just build your fully customized home, that's a different story. But let's say you're buying a pre-construction from a company that is just developing an entire street or an entire neighborhood, or maybe a few condo towers that are in a condo development, right? So typically, you won't be able to necessarily customize it as much as if you were hiring a company to build your own home from scratch. But you typically have a few different options for, do you want to use laminate, or do you want to go with a slightly more expensive option, laminate flooring, for example, or do you want to go with the slightly more expensive option of maybe having hardwood floors, or in some cases, maybe actually have, tiling floor, you have the choice to go with relatively inexpensive tiles, or some more expensive higher grade tiles, or even maybe something like marble flooring for your bathroom or your kitchen or things like that. So typically you have a lot more customization available for you from the onset. Obviously you can buy a house and just either do it yourself or hire a company and just remodel the entire house, but typically if you're buying an existing home, unless you're purposely are buying a fixer upper, you will typically overpay at that point, because you're going to be paying already for the renovations that have already been done, and now you're buying the house, and now you have to sink into it another X number of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to re-customize it to your own liking. Whereas with the pre-construction, if you want from the get-go to go with the marble countertops or the granite countertops, then you just pay a bit more, and they just install the marble or granite countertops instead of the laminate ones. And yeah, sure, you'll pay more, but it'll be a lot less expensive than having put in the laminate ones first, brand new, and then paying someone else to rip them out again and replace them with something else. So with a pre-construction, you definitely have a lot more customization. In many cases, you might also have a bit more customization in terms of looking at the amount of rooms that or the number of rooms or number of bedrooms, bathrooms. If you want to to have a finished basement or not a finished basement, obviously with every single option that you choose, the price will either increase or decrease slightly depending on how you're going. But again, the take home there is it definitely allows you for a lot more customization. That, as I said, you could definitely do it on your own by just buying any random house that is already built. But at the end of the day, that will be more expensive, because you would have to you have to pay for the house itself, and then you have to pay for the remodel. Whereas this way, you're kind of getting more or less all that you want. Now, that being said, not every single builder will always, I would say 90+% of the time, they'll actually use the materials they were supposed to. But depending on how many delays there are, depending on how well that particular development or that particular condo tower is selling, in some instances, some developers might end up cutting corners, and you might not necessarily get exactly what you wanted. Obviously, if you're paying for marble countertops, they cannot just put some random laminate and charge you the price over marble countertops. I'm just saying, in certain cases, they might say, "Sorry, sir," or "Sorry, ma'am, we wanted to do this, but again, our supplier is no longer delivering this because of COVID-19 or because of who knows what, and because of this, now you have only 2 options instead of the 5 we initially offered you, and unfortunately, one of the 3 options we're no longer offering was one of the ones that you picked. So you have to pick something else at this point in time." So that's one thing to keep in mind. You also have the potential for buying at a discount, especially if you're getting into it relatively early on. This is especially true when it comes to condo towers, although this might also be true for urban developments if you're looking at an entire street or entire neighborhood that is being redone by one particular developer. So if you're among the first, X number of individuals, you might get a 20, 30, 50% discount compared to what is the current estimated price. So if they're currently estimating the correct price and they're genuinely giving you a discount, so let's say similar houses across the street where those houses were built last year, now they're developing the other side of the street. Last year those houses sold for $500,000. In the meantime, prices went up by 2%, let's say. So at this point, it's selling for basically $501,000. Okay, so it's not a huge increase in value, or $510,000. I'm missing a zero there. So they might say, well, look, right now this house or similar houses are worth $510,000. So as a result, we're going to offer you a 20% discount to this $510,000. So because of that, we're going to, or sometimes they might give you a 20% discount, but they're offered to pay the HST, where they might give you other incentives. Let's say, oh, we're giving you a 20% discount and a free upgrade of your choice in your kitchen. You get either upgrade the laminate, what do you call them? The doors and all the for your cupboards. All your cupboards will be made out of real wood instead of laminate, or you get to upgrade your countertops. Which one do you pick, right? So some of them might upgrade your kitchen fully, some might offer different incentives. So again, this is, you have to look whichever one you're looking at. So let's say in this case, they say, you know what, we're going to be giving you a $102,000 discount, right? That's $102,000 discount. Here you go. So as a result, you can buy this house for $408,000 instead. Okay. So that sounds pretty nice, right? It sounds like a really good deal, right? And as I said, if they correctly evaluate the comparable houses, sure, that could be a good deal. The only problem is this is an estimate of what the value of the house is today, right? In many cases, these pre-construction projects, and especially when you want to go, when you're eligible for those deals, you're not eligible for those deals when, in most cases, when you're buying into it way after the project has started, unless all they have left to sell is like 2 or 3 units, and they just want to kind of wrap up the project. There might be a few deals at the very end as well. Typically, the vast majority of people buy it in the midpoint, where you might still get a discount compared to a already existing home, but it's typically a lot less than what I'm highlighting here. So because of that, what you want to be doing is again, be aware of when are those particular timelines that the builder or the developer is setting up for themselves. So they're saying, well, your house or your condo will be ready in 2 years from now, in 3 years from now, right? So much can happen in those 2 to 3 years. Chances are house prices will be somewhat higher in 2 to 3 years from now. Condo prices, depending on which condos, again, given the current environment, they might be flat, they might be slightly higher. I honestly highly doubt they'll be exponentially higher compared to what they are today, but no one knows. Those are just guesses. As a matter of fact, if you've looked at the most recent data coming from Toronto and Vancouver especially, house prices have increased significantly in July. You might be wondering, how on earth is that even possible? I thought there's a pandemic going on, and I thought there were 8 million Canadians that are either on CERB or on unemployment. Close to 1 million Canadians are not able to make their mortgage payments. How on earth are house prices going up? Right, and actually they've gone up significantly in a few of the large cities. Now, one of the so there are 3 main reasons for that, and again you'll see how this makes sense in a second. So reason number 1 is we are having historically low interest rates, right? Interest rates are ridiculously low. Right now, you can basically lock in a 5-year mortgage for right around 2%, a 10-year mortgage for about 2.5%, assuming you have a decent credit score, which is ridiculously cheap, right? So when money is cheap, it fuels spending, right? Because if it's cheap to borrow money, well, might as well borrow now, right? So that's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is because of COVID, there was pretty much no spring market. The period of time, basically the time of year where you see the largest amount of activity in the real estate / housing market is in basically the spring, right? So from March till about early June or thereabouts, you see the largest number of house and condo sales, typically from year after year after year in Canada. That's your cyclical pattern right there. But obviously there was no spring market because, again, most realtors were not allowed to go visit. They were actively discouraging in-person visits. You might be able to do a virtual visit. You might be able to go and visit someone, and they would have very specific guidelines by the Quebec, if you're in Quebec, by the Quebec health authorities, or in most other Canadian provinces, same things were implemented. So in many cases, if you wanted to go visit a house or a condo, the current tenants or the current owner would have to actually be waiting outside of the house or condo while the realtor or real estate agent took one person at a time visiting the condo or the house. So that's very unusual. So because there were very few sales and very few visits, and there was pretty much no spring market, there's a lot of pent-up demand. There were a lot of people that wanted to buy a house that didn't get to do so in the spring. So as a result, in July, as restrictions started getting diminished, you see this big spike in sales. On top of that, a lot of other people are very much worried that they're going to get they're very much worried about what the situation is. So not that many people, or significantly fewer people than usual or than you would expect, listed their homes for sale. And because fewer people have listed them, there's less demand. And obviously, whenever you have, if you're looking at basic economics, when you have more people, right, because you had no spring market, so you have larger numbers of people chasing after just a handful of listings, right, and money is cheap to get, so you have more money available, you start having bidding wars. You start having people outbidding and just increasing prices artificially. So I'm not saying prices will necessarily collapse in August or even by September, but as those close to, like, I think it's about 750, 800,000 people that are currently deferring their mortgages, that are barely able to, afford anything else other than the, basic food. And as last week I was talking about, potentially the government replacing CERB with employment insurance, or a different form of employment insurance, and trying to encourage people to go back to work. In those instances, what ends up happening is there will, at that point in time, people that cannot afford their houses anymore will start to have to list them. So then you will start seeing an increase in the supply on the market. And on top of that, construction was also halted for a number of weeks in certain areas during the spring. So as a result, a number of condos and other construction projects, residential projects, have been delayed. And a lot of them that were supposed to be ready for, let's say, May or June, were only ready in July or now in August. So all of this combined, it made prices go higher, and in certain areas of the country, in certain cities, in certain areas of cities, significantly so. Okay, so all of this to say is that yes, no one has any clue how the COVID issue will be resolved, how long it will linger, and to what extent it will impact the real estate market, especially the high-rise downtown condo market, right? That's the segment that most experts say that will be impacted for the longest. And some like to joke that there's a good chance that the taller the condo you're purchasing a unit in, the longer those prices will take to recover or return once you see this deferral cliff that is looming around the border come the fall or early winter at the latest. So with all of that background, right, how likely are the current builders, the current developers, to correctly estimate the true value, the true cost of the units that you're purchasing, right? So it becomes a much bigger guessing game. They will try to just look at, what are current comparable prices, or especially if you bought something, 2-3 years ago. Chances are, yes, you locked in a price, especially if you got this discount from the get-go, that is lower than it is now. But it's difficult to say for certain what those prices will be. So that's an advantage, right? That's a pro that you can get this discount. But just be aware that that discount you're getting the discount on a hypothetical price compared to other units that are currently already done, projected into the future by 2 or 3 years, right? It's very difficult to say to what extent that price is undervalued or overvalued. But at the very least, if you're buying something like that you're getting at a current discount, and again, it's your prerogative, your responsibility as the buyer of a pre-construction to do your research, look at what are other comparables to that particular condo or to that particular house that is going to you're buying as a pre-construction right now to be delivered to you in 2022 or 2023. Look at what are those prices currently priced, not just what the developer says it is currently priced, just on the off chance that they're a bit wrong, right? Now, then another interesting benefit of a pre-construction is that you actually get to lock in the current low mortgage rates. The likelihood that mortgages will be significantly lower in 2 to 3 years from now is very, very low, right? It's much more likely that mortgages will be the same or quite a bit higher than they are right now, provided things start recovering to some extent. Now this is, I'm just using here Rate Hub. I'm just going to paste this in the chat. That way you can check out the links yourselves. So this is literally just what is currently available in terms of what what are the current mortgage rates, right? So let's just pick a mortgage. Let's say we want to look at a 5-year fixed. About 70% of Canadians use a 5-year fixed mortgage. So let's see what are our various options. So let's say we're going to be selecting here, I don't know, let's say Montreal. We want to look at Montreal, for instance. Okay, sorry. All right, so we're looking at Montreal, and these are some of the currently available rates. Never mind, sorry, because this, I'm just trying to see the rates themselves. Okay, so fixed. There we go. Sorry, it was the show more button. For some strange reason, they usually also show who, I'm not sure why it's not loading, but normally it should also next to it here, either in front or over here, I believe. It usually also shows you who the particular broker is for each one of these. So you can see here you can get a 10-year for 2.79%, for instance, right? A 10-year fix. So that means for 10 years, you know exactly how much you're going to be paying. So the nice, really cool thing about a pre-construction is you get to lock in these rates. So let's say if you're getting a 5-year fix and you qualify for the 1.79% here, you can lock it in for 5 years, and then it's good for 5 years only once the home is delivered to you. So if it takes 3 years for the house to be built or the condo to be built and finished and you get to move in, then you lock in the 1.79% rate, provided you're pre-approved for it. And it gets to start and be in place for 5 years, but starting only in 3 years from now. So it's not as if you have to start making the payments in the meantime. Right now, you just need a portion of your deposit. So keep in mind the deposit itself, once you close, so once the house is or condo is delivered to you, you will owe 15 to 20% of the value of the house, but your initial deposit is typically still around 5%. So right now you would still owe about 5% only, but then once it's done, you would have to contribute the balance, okay? But because overall here, right, with the houses, I was just telling you, it depends on the value of the house, and that's when you need that you need those percentages. Whereas here, it doesn't really matter what the value is. You will typically need at least 15 to 20% in total. Initially, you can get away with the 5% while they're still building your house, but once the house is done or the condo is done, then you have to have enough money to pay off the balance, basically. All right. So the reason I'm pointing this out is that basically that enables you to move forward in time and lock in a ridiculously low rate. So that's an interesting possibility when you're considering a pre-construction. Now, what are some of the cons or the downsides, basically, of buying an existing home? Well, again, it's usually more expensive because obviously, if you manage to get a discount, again, this is all assuming that the builder, the developer, has the correct estimate. Because if they have the wrong estimate, then right. So this is assuming they estimated the value correctly, and yes, so obviously if a pre-construction is cheaper, the converse is also true, meaning an existing home will, as a result, be slightly more expensive. And again, I already pointed out that it's more complicated to customize when I was talking about customization and how easy it is to customize a pre-construction condo to some extent. Now, what are some of the cons for a pre-construction? Well, delays in delivery are relatively common. Even when you don't have to deal with a pandemic, and as I said, this is, I think, probably one of the better excuses for them not delivering on time, or the more reasonable excuses for them not delivering on time. But when you're dealing with a pre-construction, again, sometimes maybe they weren't able to sell off all the units or all the houses they were hoping for. And sometimes they might run out of money. Because they run out of money, now they have to wait until the sales team sells sufficient additional units for them to have now sufficient money to finish the project. So delays are relatively common, even when you're not shutting down the entire economy right around it. You also have the potential for overpaying, the same way that you could potentially get a discount. if the valuation is not done properly, right? Either because the builder was overly optimistic, or because by the time you manage to sell, you know, right now, as I said, house prices especially have gone up significantly in places like Toronto in July. It was one of the best Julys on record, but that was because of all that pent up demand. But what if you, once the pre-construction is ready, you just happen to be finalizing it exactly as some people are panicking because of something else that is going on in the economy. And at that point in time, you might say, oh my God, I could have just bought the same unit for a few $1,000s less, despite the fact that you got this discount initially. So again, that's the gamble. So you have the potential to get a deal, but equally you could overpay. So this is why don't simply just take them at their word what it's worth. Do your own research, compare prices with other existing units, not other potentially existing units, because at that point you're comparing this builder's estimate to this other builder's estimate. So you want to compare it to something that already exists, that is as close as possible geographically speaking, and as close as possible in design and size and material quality as your future pre-construction, to get a better sense of this. And obviously the other negative here is you always have to pay the HST when you're buying a pre-construction, unless one of the deals or one of those discounts you're getting from the builder or the developer is that they are taking care of paying the taxes for you. Whereas again, with existing home, you only have to pay the HST if you're buying a brand new home and you're the very first owner. Otherwise, you do not have to deal with that. And in certain cases, an entire development, whether it's a condo tower or whether it's a whole residential neighborhood, might actually get canceled if there's not sufficient demand or if something happens in that particular area. So imagine that area was employing, you had a couple of large businesses in that area that were employing hundreds of people. And because they were employing hundreds of people, there's these new condo developments that were close to this large facility, for example, and as a result, they predicted that a lot of people want to live close to work, right? But then if that company decides to move elsewhere, or maybe they're shutting down because of the pandemic and they have to downsize or something like that, at that point in time, if there's sufficient demand that drops, an entire development may actually get canceled. In those cases, you typically get your entire deposit back unless the company files for bankruptcy at the same time. So that's another potential risk when you're thinking about this. So what are some of so I hope those are sort of the main pros and cons. So now that we've seen these pros and cons, what are some additional questions that you really should be asking yourself in order to determine whether buying a pre-construction is specifically right for you, right? Because those were kind of more general terms that I brought up there. One of the main things that you'll probably want to look at is really be honest with yourself. Why are you buying it, right? Why do you want to buy a house, whether it's a pre-construction or not? Is it because you think it's a good time to invest? Is it because you need a place to live and you want to stop paying someone else's mortgage under, in quotation marks there? Why is it that you're buying, right? So literally you can list those reasons on a piece of paper, on in a Word document. And again, be honest with yourself. And how likely are those reasons to change in a year from now, in 2 years from now? Because keep in mind, when you're buying a pre-construction, chances are you're not going to see it, or you're not going to move into it for at least a couple of years from now in most cases, all right? So make sure that you're not buying it on impulse, right? I'm sure we've all been there. Whether it's a new pair of shoes, a new gadget, some sports equipment, that we're like, oh my God, it's such a good deal. Look, it's 20% off. They have pucks on sale for 20% off. It's like, oh, okay. Do you actually play hockey? No, but eventually I might take it up at some point in time, right? So same idea. You really need to buy a house or a condo, and have you considered the sort of the pros and cons that we've mentioned before of a pre-construction versus something that is already built, right? So what are your reasons? So look at that. What are some alternatives? So if you really want to buy, well, because you think it's a good time to get it as an investment, and you also need a place to live, so might as well, right? What are some of the other alternatives? Because if it's an investment, the whole point of an investment is to make you wealthier down the line, whether it's in a few years from now or in a few decades from now, right? Depending on your timelines, exactly, right? So it also depends on, when did you want to sell it if you're just buying it as an investment? Do you want to hold on to it for a couple of years? Do you want to hold on to it until you get a promotion? Do you want to hold on to it until you graduate? Do you want to hold on to it until whenever, right? Or until retirement? So you have to think about these things. And again, be honest with yourself. And again, if you're looking at it from an investment point of view, what are some of your alternatives? Well, pretty simple. You can buy existing real estate, right? That's one option. Instead of just waiting 2 years on the sidelines, you can just buy something right now. Another option is if you want to invest in real estate without owning real estate directly, you can buy a real estate investment trust, right? A REIT. You can buy it that way. Or do you have any other form of investments? Do you have any ETFs, or are you invested in the market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So look at those factors as well, right? If it's literally just for investment, and just look, compare the numbers, look at the pros and cons. You can view some of my previous sessions or in future videos more about that. So again, do you really fully understand the risks involved? For instance, what happens if this pre-construction that you're purchasing today for a delivery date 2 years from now, what happens if at that point in time there's a delay of a few months because for whatever reason it took them longer to finish? Are you forced to move in 2 years from now, or will you have a bit of flexibility? What happens if at that point in time you're no longer employed at your current employer? How secure and how sure are you that your current job will still be a thing in 2 or 3 years from now? Will you have something to supplement it? Do you have any investments or other sources of income that in case you fall on hard times, you'll still be able to afford making the payments? Because keep in mind, upon delivery of pre-construction, the remaining 10 to 20 to 15% is owed, right? Because initially, as I said, in most cases, you will owe between 15 and 20% for a pre-construction. You put roughly 5% down initially, which means your balance due when they actually deliver the house to you will be between 10 and 15%. Do you have that money sitting somewhere in a relatively safe investment or relatively easily available or accessible? So how secure is your current source of income? Because if you don't know whether you'll still have a job in a few months from now, what tells you that you for sure will have a job 2 or 3 years down the line? Do you also have any other significant debts, especially if you have things like high interest credit card debt, so high interest debt? Because again, if you're buying it as an investment, statistically speaking, it's highly unlikely that any form of real estate will be jumping in value by 20% or more year over year, which credit cards charge you that much. So this is kind of the usual kind of logical thing to do: pay off high interest debts before you do any form of investing. And buying a pre-construction condo or a house falls within that same kind of general sphere of knowledge and yeah. And also, for how long can you actually afford to lock in your money? Again, when it comes to real estate, you're really playing the long game, right? Because sure, house prices, condo prices, they can go up significantly in some cases, in some months, when, especially again, when the spring market was shut down like it was this year. You might have the best July in recorded history in many Canadian cities, even at the height of a pandemic. So whether that makes sense or it's just crazy, just think about it, right? You have about a third of the Canadian workforce not working. Yet condo and house prices are going up. Yet we had the highest demand for houses and condos this July of any July as far as they've been keeping records. So again, it's all of those other factors that I already talked to you about before. But if you ignore the factors, you're like, oh my God, housing is going up, right? It's just the whole issue of recency bias. What has recently happened is bound to continue happening and going into perpetuity. That's when you run into trouble. I'm not trying to tell you don't buy. I'm not trying to tell you buy. What I'm trying to say is it really depends on your circumstances. If you have other investments, if you're a government employee with a relatively steady source of income, you probably are fine locking in your money for that number of, for a few years and then having to pay that extra 15% or whatever it is to close. The nice thing is you lock in that low interest rate right now, right? Probably be really good off locking in a 10-year rate, because keep in mind a 10-year right now, if you're buying a pre-construction, again, this is just one website, one example here, but you could look, and look at your own situation. In Canada, again, the longest mortgage term is 10 years. In other countries such as the US, you can get up to 30 years, but in Canada, the limit is really 10 years. So yeah, sure, 2.79 is a whole percentage more than for the 5-year over here. But at the same time, you're literally locking it in for twice as long. So sure, initially you might overpay, but especially if you're only going to start making those payments 2 to 3 years from now because you're buying a pre-construction and you're locking in the rate right now, you're probably much better off just paying that extra 2 points, or potentially paying that extra 1% for 5 years, because after that you will be able to save substantially on the next 5 years after. Okay, so yeah, most experts seem to agree that if you're about to if you're about to get a mortgage right now, locking in a 10-year or a 5-year, especially a 10-year, might actually be really good, especially if you have a good credit score. Again, you might overpay initially because the 10-year is a bit more expensive than the 5, but there's a good chance that the following 5 years you will underpay substantially less. I mean, the amount that you will underpay by will be substantially more than the 1% difference that you're overpaying initially here. That's just something to keep in mind. So the reason why I'm asking here for how long can you lock in is because in case the economy hasn't properly recovered and we're still dealing with COVID, whatever, in 2022 or 2023, in 2 to 3 years from now, when your pre-construction condo is ready and people are freaked out and they don't want to be living in condos downtown for any time soon, at that point in time, if you can lock in for a decade or more, you're more likely to be able to eventually recoup your investment. Whether it's worth the extra risk, it's not really my place to tell, right? It's really dependent upon you and your own situation. So now the bottom line, it depends. Should you buy a pre-construction in general? The answer is it really depends. Should you buy a pre-construction at the in the midst of a historical pandemic, a historic pandemic? It definitely depends, right? So it's not that you should or should not do it. You just have to look at all of these aspects. And typically a pre-construction, again, is significantly higher risk than buying something that is already built. And also typically buying something that is already built is quite a bit higher risk than having a balanced and diversified portfolio in terms of, distributing risk, right? Because when you're having a balanced, diversified portfolio, you have risk that is distributed. Now, that being said, if you can afford it and you don't mind having the money locked in and potentially it being valued a bit less for a certain amount of time, then recovering to some extent, and before eventually you're recovering altogether, then that's okay. If you can afford it, then go right ahead, right? It's just, I want you to make certain that you're not making the mistake of just assuming that this is one of those investments that anyone can invest in at any time and they'll always make money. No, The vast majority of investments, that's not how they function. Different investments are right for different people at different points in time in their lives, right? Standard pre-construction is higher risk than a house. An existing one is higher risk than the diversified balanced portfolio. And then if you're going all the way to the other side, a pre-construction in the middle of a pandemic is, technically speaking, even higher risk. Now, because it's higher risk, if things go semi-decently, at that point in time, 2-3 years from now, you might look like the smartest person in the world if you bought when no one else wanted to buy, assuming people are fine going back to work normally, and you're buying a condo downtown, for example, and people are fine with high-rise buildings by then, and on and on and on. But no one knows. So this is the potential for a higher reward, but you're taking on the extra high risk of all of those unknowns. Okay? All right, so just to wrap up, pre-constructions, again, do offer some interesting incentives, and I hope I made it very clear in terms of what some of those incentives were. With the potential for higher reward comes, obviously, as always, higher risk. I think that was pretty clear as well. Now, the more flexible you can be personally, the more feasible a pre-construction for you right now becomes. And the flexibility, I'm not talking about, how flexible your body is. I'm talking about how flexible you are from an income and cash flow point of view. Right? If you're someone who already has a decently balanced portfolio, or you have a very, very safe job, like a tenure track professor or something like that, for instance, at that point, yes, sure, a pre-construction might be very feasible. You're taking on a bigger gamble than usual, but again, it could pay off, handsomely. If, on the other hand, you're someone who's living paycheck to paycheck in normal times, and right now you're struggling very, very, very much, buying a pre-construction with the only savings that you have right now is probably the worst thing you could possibly do, right? So it's a bit unfortunate that economic crises, economic slowdowns open up this weird dichotomy, because what does all of this mean? Well, it means that if you have money and you don't mind locking the money in for a certain number of years or potentially a decade or longer, you could stand, again, could, not can for sure, it's a potential, you could stand to make a significant amount of money a certain amount of years down the line. If things don't work out, then it's probably a good thing to avoid. But all of this to say that when economic hardship hits, it disproportionately negatively impacts those that have fewer means, and exponentially positively impacts those that have more money to invest, more money to have parked and sit on the sidelines. Because what happens if you were to risk buying a pre-construction but you can barely afford things right now? Well, if things don't look rosy by the time you have to close the deal and pay the remaining 10-15% leftover, or balance, I should say, if you're not able at that point in time to make the payment, you still owe that amount of money. The bank still will ask you to pay them. They're not going to just be, sitting there being like, oh, it's okay. Right now we understand you're going through hard times, so just don't. It's fine if you're not paying us. You have to, lock in. You have to kind of finalize that transaction, because the developer is waiting on their money. So you might be able to delay it by a month or something like that, but you cannot delay it indefinitely. So it is a potential significantly higher risk if you were to do it that way. So it is incredibly, incredibly important to run your own numbers in your, given your own specific situation. So one of the main things you should really consider is, before you even consider a pre-construction, is should you rent versus buy, right? So the first question you should answer is does it make more sense for you financially to rent or to buy? And then if you're leaning very hardly towards the buy option because you have the funds, etc., then you should be looking at the whole point of buying existing real estate versus pre-construction, right? So first answer this question. and then answer this question. Because as I said, this is higher risk than this, and this is most certainly higher risk than that. So depending on where you are, one or the other might be the right option for you. So to reiterate, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to this type of investment. It does have some really interesting potential for making money in terms of if you've done your research properly, if the developer has correctly identified the value of the property, and you're buying it early on, so you're getting a substantial discount, or maybe later on when they're about to just close the project. So in those cases, it might make a lot of sense. But if that's not the case, if the pricing is very vastly overhyped or overvalued, if house prices, or especially condo prices, are going to go all over the place, if you're not able to get the money, you're on the hook for paying to finalize that deal. If you're not able to finalize the deal, the builder is able to basically sell that property to somebody else, but charge you damages for it. You lose that initial 5% deposit, and you might lose significantly more. And in certain cases, if then the builder finds somebody else to buy it at a discount, you owe the builder the difference in. So let's say you agreed to buy it for, well, as we said earlier, for $500,000 or $510,000. Sorry, the initial price they said, well, it's $510, so they're gonna give you that discount. So you're gonna get $108,000 discounted. So, or sorry, $102,000 discounted. So you're only paying $408,000 in total. You had your 5% down payment, and at this point in time, they're like, okay, now you owe us an additional 15%. Let's say once the closing is, once they're about to close. But let's say right now, for whatever reason, the price, despite the fact that you got it at discount, the current going prices are just under $400,000, or $399 for that unit, or for a similar condo. So as a result, you don't want to close, or the bank won't approve you for the full amount, and you don't want the difference. Again, the builder can turn around and sell it to somebody else. Again, you will lose your 5% down payment. There's typically additional lawyer fees and contract breaking fees and various other penalties in place there. Again, read the fine print. And then let's say they only managed to sell it for $395,000. Well, at this point, you, on top of all those extra fees, you would owe the $13,000 difference, the $408,000 minus $395,000. Right, so that gives you $13,000 difference that you would also owe to the actual developer as well. So this is why I'm saying, if you're really strapped for cash, pre-construction is probably a terrible idea for you. If you have quite a bit of cash and your sources of income are relatively steady because you have significant investments, you have other sources of generating income on an ongoing basis, regardless of what happens in the broader economy, then a pre-construction, especially once you research it properly, might be a good deal. But it's not necessarily now. More likely, again, not according to me, but according to most experts that have been looking at this deferral cliff that is bound to occur in the mid to late fall or early winter this coming year, when again, once the CMHC stops those mortgage deferrals and the banks start asking people to make their payments, those that won't be able to afford their payments yet will have to be listing. And the same way that July was the best July on record, there's a good chance that come October or November, those will be the worst October or November market on record. Is it guaranteed? No, it's just, those are just guesses. I have no idea what's going to happen, but that's what most professionals seem to be saying. So that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover in today's session. By the way, starting next week, I was thinking of tweaking the format of these sessions a little bit. There's typically not that many people that actually join in for the live session. So most people that watch these tend to watch them post fact. And I think for most people, it's a bit difficult to kind of pay attention for a full hour. If when it's a live stream, it's a bit easier, but because most people watch this post fact, I think I might try to maybe make them only half an hour, so that way I'll make them a bit faster, and I'll move the starting time to 3:30. So starting next Thursday, the live streams will be starting from 3:30 and will last for about half an hour until about 4 p.m. And yes, I haven't gotten around to posting the video. I've been meaning for the last 2 weeks to post the video, but yeah, I've been really busy with programming for my class that I'm teaching at the various in McGill and so on and so forth. So right now I'm still trying to figure that part out, and then but yeah, once that is taken care of, hopefully in the next few days, I actually have a few videos that are almost done editing. And I'll be posting them ASAP. So then you'll have some short 10-15 minute videos that are kind of on various topics about personal finance. And again, this slight move here with the webinar, with the live streams. The topic for next week, I haven't decided yet, because again, depending on if I manage to finish the videos that I'm hoping to finish by Monday, the live stream will have something to do with that first video or the second video that I want to publish, both of them. If I don't finish it, then it'll be something else. So I'll just have a look at the channel, and you'll see what the topic is. By Tuesday latest, I'll post it on the channel headline. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your busy days to attend today's session. I hope this was useful. And yeah, if you have any questions, leave it down in the comments below. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you at some other point in a future session. So take care, everyone, and have a great remainder of the day. Bye-bye.